The night was cold, the kind of November chill that seeps into your bones even when you're young and invincible. On the quiet campus of St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota, students were scattered across dorms and apartments, doing what students always do on a Saturday night, talking, laughing, and trying to push the weight of exams out of their minds for just a few hours. Among them was 20-year-old Joshua Guimond. Josh was smart, ambitious, and social enough to move easily through campus life. That evening, he joined a group of friends at a small dorm party. Nothing unusual, just college students gathering to play cards, drink beer, and joke into the late hours of the night. It wasn't a wild party, but it was enough to keep people awake past midnight. At some point before midnight, Josh left briefly, heading back to his own dorm room to grab more beer. He used his key card to swipe in and out. It was a mundane action, one that would later become an anchor in reconstructing his last known movements. Around 11:45 p.m., he said his goodbyes and stepped out of the apartment where the poker game was still going strong. Friends assumed he was heading back to his dorm, a short walk away. 3 minutes, that's all it should have taken him. A straight line, a simple walk across familiar ground. But those 3 minutes would become a lifetime of questions. Some students later claimed to have spotted him near a bridge close to Stumpf Lake between 12:15 and 12:30 a.m., but no one can say for certain. Was it really him? Or just someone similar, moving through the dark? What makes the timeline chilling is not just its brevity, but its silence. Josh never arrived at his dorm. His room remained exactly as he left it, glasses, wallet, car keys still on the desk. His car stayed parked where it always was. His bed untouched. No one saw him after that. The next morning, when Josh failed to show up for a scheduled mock trial practice, a commitment he would never miss, friends knew something was wrong. They tried calling, checking his room, retracing his steps. Still nothing. It wasn't long before panic set in. Students whispered. Parents were called. Campus security was alerted. By the time the sun rose over St. John's on November 10th, the realization had spread. Josh Guimond had vanished into the night. Not a trace. Not a word. Not a single sign that explained why a 3-minute walk turned into a 20-year mystery. Before a mystery becomes legend, it begins with a life. And Josh Guimond's life was one that seemed destined for success. Josh was born in 1982 and grew up in Maple Lake, Minnesota, a small town where people knew each other's names, where families gathered for Friday football games, and where ambition often pushed young people to look beyond the borders of their hometown. From the very beginning, Josh stood out. In high school, he wasn't just another face in the yearbook. He was valedictorian, class president, and a student known for his sharp mind and sharper wit. Teachers remembered him as the kind of young man who could argue any point with a calm confidence that made him seem older than his years. Friends described him as approachable, funny, and fiercely loyal. Josh had his eyes set on law school. He dreamed of a career in public service, maybe politics someday. He wasn't content to drift through college like so many others. For him, every decision was a stepping stone toward a bigger goal. When he enrolled at St. John's University, a Catholic college in the quiet town of Collegeville, it was the perfect environment for him to thrive. The campus itself was picturesque, tucked away in the woods of central Minnesota, surrounded by lakes and forests. To outsiders, it looked peaceful, almost too peaceful, the kind of place where nothing bad could ever happen. Josh became deeply involved in campus life. He was active in mock trial competitions, where he honed his debating skills, preparing for the courtroom future he imagined. He was outspoken in class, curious about politics, and eager to test ideas. His professors saw him as a young man going places. But life is never as simple as it looks on the surface. Months before his disappearance, Josh had gone through a breakup with his girlfriend. Friends later said he handled it well enough. There were no signs of depression, no confessions of despair, but it was a crack in an otherwise steady life. He poured himself into his studies and campus activities, determined not to let personal struggles slow him down. Still, he was human. And in the days leading up to November 9th, he carried the same mix of stress, fatigue, and youthful distraction as any other student. His friends say he seemed normal. Nothing stood out as a red flag. No sudden behavior changes. No dramatic warnings. That's what makes his disappearance so unnerving. Because when someone who has everything ahead of them, someone with no obvious reason to run, simply vanishes, it doesn't just feel like a mystery. It feels impossible. By 2002, Josh was more than just another student on campus. He was a leader, a thinker, and a friend. He was the kind of young man whose absence would be noticed immediately, because his presence was impossible to ignore. And yet, on that cold November night, the life of a promising student collided with the unknown. The brilliant young man from Maple Lake walked out of a dorm, and into silence. On paper, the distance was nothing. From Metten Court, where Josh had been playing cards with friends that night, to his own dorm room in St. Moore House, the walk should have taken 3 minutes. The path cut straight across campus, well lit in some places, dark in others. A route Josh had taken dozens of times before. Familiar, easy, unremarkable. But on the night of November 9th, 2002, that short walk became a void. Investigators later retraced his steps with painstaking care. If Josh left the poker party just before midnight, he would have had 2 options. Follow the main walkway, the safer but slightly longer route, or cut through darker shortcuts, paths that hugged the woods and skirted near the lakes. Students often chose the quicker path, even at night. It was habit, convenience, a simple way to shave off minutes. And Josh, like so many others, likely did the same. The problem was the landscape itself. St. John's University was not just a campus of classrooms and dorms. It was built inside a patchwork of dense woods, winding trails, and 5 lakes. It was beautiful during the day, but at night those same lakes and trees could swallow sound, conceal movement, and blur the line between the safe and the dangerous. One of those lakes, Stump Lake, sat just off the path Josh may have taken. The bridge over the lake was narrow, the water below dark and cold in November. Students later reported seeing someone who looked like Josh near that bridge between 12:15 and 12:30 a.m. If it was him, it meant his walk had been delayed or diverted. Why? That question lingers like an echo. And then there was the detail no one could ignore. Josh was not wearing his glasses. He'd left them behind in his dorm room. Without them, his vision would have been blurred, especially at night. Friends said he wasn't blind without them, but it was enough to make the world hazier, less certain. On a dark campus near lakes and wooded trails, that mattered. The path that night was more than geography. It was possibility. If Josh stuck to the well-lit route, how did no one else see him? If he cut through shortcuts, what could have happened in the shadows? And if he really was spotted at the bridge, did he cross safely, or did something, or someone intercept him there? That 3-minute walk became the beating heart of the investigation. Because if you can't explain how a healthy young man disappears in the span of 3 minutes on a campus full of people, you begin to realize something chilling. The ordinary world is never as safe as it looks. Josh's walk should have ended with the sound of a key sliding into a dorm lock. Instead, it ended with nothing. No sight, no sound, just silence. And silence can be the loudest clue of all. At first, it didn't seem like anything was wrong. It was Sunday morning, November 10th, 2002. Students dragged themselves out of bed, nursing hangovers, finishing homework, or heading to practice for upcoming competitions. But for Josh's mock trial teammates, the morning felt off. Josh never missed practice. He wasn't the kind of student who let obligations slide. When he failed to show up that day, without a call, a message, or even an excuse, alarm bells rang. His friends called his dorm room. No answer. They walked over. The door was closed, but when someone managed to check inside, everything looked untouched. His car keys were on the desk. His glasses still sat by the bed. His car was in its usual parking spot. Even his wallet was there. It was as though he had only stepped out for a moment. But Josh was gone. By early afternoon, his absence could no longer be dismissed as a misunderstanding. Friends reported him missing. Soon, campus security and local police mobilized. The search began with the obvious, the short path between Metten Court and Josh's dorm. Officers and volunteers retraced every step, calling his name, scanning the ground for any sign, a dropped phone, a piece of clothing, footprints in the soft earth. Nothing. Next came the dogs. Bloodhounds were brought in, their noses pressed to clothing taken from Josh's room. They pulled handlers toward the wooded areas and down toward Stump Lake. The scent trail seemed to stop at the water's edge. Divers entered the lake, combing its depths with underwater cameras and sonar. Boats swept the surface. Volunteers waded along the shoreline. The idea was simple, chilling, and plausible. Maybe Josh had fallen into the lake on his way back to the dorm. Maybe alcohol, poor lighting, and the cold night air had conspired to pull him under. But days of searching turned up nothing. No body, no clothing, no evidence at all. The lake gave up no secrets. As word spread across campus, fear took hold. Students whispered in the dining halls, wondering if Josh had been kidnapped, attacked, or lured away. Theories spread like wildfire. Some refused to walk alone at night. Others avoided the wooded trails entirely. Meanwhile, Josh's family was living a nightmare. His father and mother rushed to campus, desperate for answers. They pressed police, asking the questions everyone else was afraid to say aloud. How can a 20-year-old vanish from a college campus without anyone noticing? Why was there no trace, no calls, no texts, no sightings? And if it wasn't the lake, then what else could it be? The search expanded in the following days. Helicopters scanned the woods from above. Officers knocked on doors across campus, interviewing students who had been out that night. Every possible corner of St. John's was inspected: dorm basements, maintenance tunnels, abandoned classrooms. Nothing. Each passing hour chipped away at hope. The early window, the critical 48 hours when most missing persons cases are solved, slipped by with no breakthroughs. Josh wasn't in his dorm. He wasn't in his car. He wasn't in the lake. He wasn't anywhere. It was as if the earth itself had opened up and swallowed him whole. And for investigators, that terrifying possibility meant something else. If Josh hadn't left a trace on his own, then perhaps someone else had made sure he couldn't. When the searches turned up nothing, no body in the lakes, no trace in the woods, investigators and students alike were forced into a darker place: speculation. Because if Josh hadn't simply wandered off and fallen victim to the elements, then what else could explain his disappearance? Theory 1, the lake. From the start, Stump Lake seemed like the most logical answer. Josh had last been seen near the bridge. The dogs traced his scent in that direction. It was cold, it was late, and he may have been drinking. To many, the idea that he slipped, stumbled, or simply miscalculated his steps made sense. But this theory soon started to unravel. Divers searched the lake multiple times. Boats dragged its surface. Underwater cameras scanned its murky depths. Each sweep ended the same way: nothing. Not a scrap of clothing, not a shoe, not a body. If Josh had drowned, his remains should have surfaced eventually. They never did. Even experts admitted it was strange. Lakes don't keep secrets forever. Theory 2, exposure. The November night was bitterly cold. Some suggested Josh, without his glasses and possibly underdressed, could have wandered into the woods, gotten lost, and succumbed to hypothermia. But the woods had been searched. Every trail, every clearing, every frozen corner turned up empty. A body doesn't vanish in plain sight. Not without help. Theory 3, voluntary disappearance. There were whispers that maybe Josh had chosen to leave. That perhaps stress from school, his recent breakup, or other personal struggles drove him to walk away from his life. But this theory didn't sit well with anyone who knew him. Josh wasn't the type to abandon his commitments, especially not mock trial, which he cared about deeply. He had law school dreams, political ambitions, and no history of running from challenges. His car, wallet, and glasses, left behind in his dorm, pointed to a young man who expected to return, not disappear. Theory 4, foul play. The theory that haunted the campus most was the possibility of abduction or violence. What if someone intercepted Josh on his short walk home? What if he'd crossed paths with the wrong person at the wrong time? There were rumors about arguments with his roommate, tension lingering from a recent breakup, even speculation about predatory figures on or near campus. None of it was confirmed, but rumors don't need proof to spread. And then there was the darker context, whispers about St. John's Abbey, a nearby religious community already under scrutiny for past abuse scandals. Some students wondered if Josh had stumbled upon something, or someone, he wasn't supposed to see. Nothing was ever proven, but suspicion lingered in the shadows. Theory 5, a predator on the loose. Adding fuel to the fire was the unsettling pattern of other young men who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances in Minnesota and neighboring states around the same era. Christopher Jenkins, another student, vanished from Minneapolis on Halloween 2002, just days before Josh. His body was found in the Mississippi River months later. Michael Knoll, a St. Cloud State student, also disappeared in 2002, his body eventually recovered from a river. The similarities, college-aged men vanishing at night, bodies near water, sparked theories about a possible serial predator, even linked by some to the so-called smiley face killer theory. But law enforcement never established a solid connection. The campus whispers. For students living at St. John's, Josh's disappearance wasn't just a news story. It was a ghost story come to life. Some avoided the bridge after dark. Others refused to walk alone at night. Rumors turned into legends whispered in hushed tones. That Josh had been taken, silenced, hidden somewhere in the vast woods or buildings around campus. Theories multiplied because the silence gave them room to grow. Every dead end in the investigation made the unknown more terrifying. And as days turned into weeks, one truth became clear. Without evidence, all anyone had were theories in the dark. The first few weeks after Josh's disappearance were frantic. Search teams, media coverage, and investigators working around the clock. But as winter set in and leads dried up, the investigation slowed to a crawl. The campus grew quieter. Students returned to classes. Life painfully began to move forward. But for Josh's family, the clock seemed frozen at November 9th, 2002. The agony of waiting. Every day, Brian and Kate Guimond, Josh's parents, called police, desperate for updates. Every day, the news was the same. No leads, no sightings, no evidence. His father in particular became relentless, refusing to let the case fade into silence. He posted flyers, contacted reporters, and pressed law enforcement to expand their efforts. But as weeks turned into months and months into years, Josh's disappearance was quietly labeled what investigators fear most: a cold case. The Guimond family was left to do the work themselves, searching, interviewing, and chasing rumors. Life on campus after Josh. For those at St. John's University, Josh's absence was like a scar. The bridge where he was last seen became a landmark of unease. Students whispered his name in dorm halls. New freshmen, who hadn't even known him, quickly learned the story. The student who walked into the night and never came back. Every few years, the media would briefly revisit the case. An anniversary, a new lead, a missing persons awareness campaign. But each time, the same painful truth emerged. Josh was still gone, and there were still no answers. The rumors that wouldn't die. The lack of progress left space for suspicion to fester. Some students insisted he had fallen into Stump Lake, despite the searches. Others whispered about foul play, pointing to inconsistencies in the investigation. Josh's father, Brian, publicly questioned the university's role. He accused administrators of withholding information and criticized investigators for not doing enough. He even suggested that the powerful influence of St. John's Abbey, with its history of abuse scandals, might have cast a shadow over the case. Law enforcement never confirmed these theories, but the Guimond family never stopped pushing. The silence of time. As years stretched on, the world around Josh kept changing. His classmates graduated, started careers, got married, had children. Josh's photo, printed on flyers and posters, stayed frozen in 2002, forever 20 years old. For his family, the hardest part wasn't just the loss. It was the not knowing. Not knowing if he was alive or dead. Not knowing if his disappearance was an accident, a crime, or something far stranger. The case grew quieter. But it was never forgotten. For those who knew Josh, the silence only deepened the mystery. For his family, it was torture that seemed endless. And yet, as the years rolled by, one truth remained. Sometimes, even decades later, mysteries have a way of forcing themselves back into the light. Because in the case of Joshua Guimond, time didn't erase the questions. It only sharpened them. For nearly 2 decades, Joshua Guimond's disappearance remained locked in silence. Theories came and went, anniversaries passed with candlelight vigils, and his family lived in a cycle of hope and heartbreak. But then came the digital age. By the late 2010s, investigators began turning to tools that simply didn't exist in 2002. Social media, advanced forensics, digital recovery software, all opened new doors that had been shut for years. And in Josh's case, they revealed something startling. The laptop discovery. Back in 2002, Josh's computer had been seized by investigators. At the time, the technology for deep digital forensics was limited. Police reviewed what they could, but much of it was left unanalyzed. Nearly 20 years later, using updated software, investigators revisited that same laptop. This time, they uncovered files and browsing history that had never been properly examined before. What they found was unsettling. Josh had been frequenting online chat rooms, spaces where strangers could pose under false identities, luring in young men. Some of these digital conversations hinted at possible meetings, secretive exchanges, and unknown contacts. It was the kind of discovery that made investigators wonder. Had Josh been talking to someone online the night he disappeared? Could he have arranged to meet a stranger near campus? Did one of those digital shadows hold the key to what happened? The new evidence didn't prove anything, but it reopened doors that had been closed for years. The digital age of missing persons. Josh's case was far from unique in this regard. Across the country, cold cases were being revived by technology. DNA genealogy, cell phone pings, social media tracing. What had once been impossible in 2002 was now standard practice. For Josh's family, the discovery was bittersweet. On one hand, it meant there were still avenues to explore. On the other, it raised new and chilling possibilities. That Josh hadn't simply stumbled into a lake or wandered into the woods, but had been lured into a trap. The power of online communities. The digital world didn't just change investigations, it gave families like the Guimonds new allies. Online true crime communities picked up Josh's story, analyzing timelines, poring over files, sharing maps of campus, and speculating about suspects. Some dismissed these efforts as amateur sleuthing, but others believed the public attention kept pressure on law enforcement, ensuring Josh's story was never forgotten. A case reopened. By the early 2020s, investigators formally acknowledged what the family had long believed. Josh's case was not a closed matter. It was active, with new evidence and new directions. The discovery of his laptop activity didn't solve the mystery, but it shifted the narrative. For years, the drowning theory had dominated. Now, the possibility of foul play tied to the digital world became harder to ignore. Nearly 2 decades after Josh vanished into the night, the mystery was alive again. And for his family, even the faintest flicker of hope was enough to keep fighting. 2 decades have passed since the night Joshua Guimond vanished on the quiet campus of St. John's University. His name is etched into Minnesota's history, not as a graduate, lawyer, or public servant as he once dreamed, but as a haunting reminder of a mystery that refuses to fade. The family that never gave up. Josh's parents, Brian and Kate, have carried a weight few can imagine. Every holiday, every birthday, every quiet evening is a reminder of what was stolen from them. His father in particular became a relentless advocate, speaking to reporters, challenging investigators, and keeping Josh's case alive in the media. Though time has aged him, his determination never waned. Somebody knows something, he often said. And he was right. Disappearances don't happen in a vacuum. Someone somewhere holds the missing piece. For the Guimonds, the fight isn't just about Josh. It's about every missing student, every family left in the same agony of unanswered questions. A changed campus. At St. John's University, the shadow of Josh's disappearance lingers. Students still talk about him, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in earnest conversation. For newer generations, his story is passed down like a warning. Be careful, don't walk alone at night. Remember what happened here. The campus itself implemented safety measures in the years after Josh's disappearance. Better lighting along pathways, increased patrols, and expanded security systems became the norm. But for many, those changes came too late. The broader pattern. Josh's case is not an isolated story. Across the Midwest, dozens of college-aged men vanished under mysterious circumstances in the early 2000s, many later found in rivers and lakes. These cases, sometimes linked in theory to the infamous smiley face killer, continue to fuel debate among criminologists, journalists, and internet sleuths. Whether or not Josh was part of that pattern, his name often appears in those discussions. His case became a touchstone for the fear that what happened once could happen again. Unfinished business. Despite years of searching, Josh's body has never been recovered. His disappearance remains unsolved. Theories continue to circulate: accident, foul play, abduction, but none have been proven. His parents still wait for the call that could bring closure. In many ways, Josh exists in 2 places at once. Frozen forever at age 20, smiling in photographs. And yet, alive in the fight to uncover the truth. The legacy. Josh's story is more than a case file. It is a reminder of how fragile safety can be, even in places we trust the most. It is a warning about the hidden dangers of campus life, the vulnerabilities of young students, and the risks of a world that grew more complex with the rise of the internet. But above all, it is a story of endurance. The endurance of a family that refused to let their son's name fade, of a community that still whispers his story, and of a mystery that refuses to stay buried. 2 decades later, one fact remains undeniable. Joshua Guimond walked into the night and vanished. The world is still waiting for him to come home.